There are evenings when time seems to hold its breath, when the light softens just enough to reveal what the years have tried to hide. On one of those evenings, in a quiet corner of her London home, Kristin Scott Thomas sat by the window, watching the last strands of daylight dissolve into the gray. At 73, her face carried the elegance the world knew, yet beneath it, the shadows of stories she had never fully told. Her hands rested calmly on her lap, but her eyes, deep and still, had the unmistakable weight of memory. It was in that hush when the city's noise felt miles away that she whispered a single sentence, fragile, almost afraid to exist beyond her breath. "There are 5 people," she said, "whose names I can never erase because they left scars on my heart. No bitterness, no drama, only a quiet truth delivered with the certainty of someone who had spent a lifetime trying to forget and failing gently. For decades, she was the image of poise on screen, the woman who could hold an entire room's silent admiration. But tonight, there were no cameras, no scripts, no roles to hide behind. Only Kristin, the woman, not the legend, facing the echo of her past. And as the darkness thickened around her, something shifted. It was as if she finally allowed those memories to take shape again, to breathe, to be named. 5 faces, 5 stories, each one a crossroads that changed her, each one a wound that shaped her silence. But who were they, these 5 people she could never truly forgive? And why do their shadows still linger after all these years? The quiet confession she murmured that night didn't rise from nowhere. It was the echo of a life shaped long before fame found her, long before the world learned to pronounce her name with admiration. To understand the 5 scars, one must return to the small, windswept town in Cornwall, where Kristin Scott Thomas spent the earliest years of her childhood. A place where the sea was both a lullaby and a warning, and where silence lived in every corner of the house. She was born in 1960, into a family marked by discipline, tradition, and the unspoken weight of British restraint. Her father, a pilot, carried the sky in his eyes, always distant, always half belonging to somewhere above the clouds. She adored him the way only a child can, absolutely unquestioningly. But devotion has a cruel way of becoming fragile. When she was barely 5, the sky took him back for good. A sudden accident, a call in the middle of the day, a mother left stunned and pale. Kristin didn't fully understand loss then, but she understood absence, its shape, its chill, its quiet command. Her mother remarried another pilot, another man who lived between Earth and the unreachable blue. And fate, almost indifferent, repeated itself. Another accident, another funeral, another silence too heavy for a child to carry. By the time Kristin was a teenager, she had already learned to live inside her own thoughts, to turn inward when the world felt unsafe. She discovered that silence could be both a refuge and a prison. At school, she wasn't the loudest or the brightest, but she possessed a stillness that made people look twice. A maturity born not from confidence, but from grief. Teachers said she had an air of distance, as if she were always listening to a conversation only she could hear. She found comfort in stories, in theater, in the illusion of becoming someone else. Acting wasn't an ambition then. It was an escape, a way to inhabit lives that didn't hurt as much as her own. And yet, beneath the poise she learned to master, something began to form. A quiet distrust in promises, a fear of sudden endings, a reluctance to give her heart freely. The wounds of childhood do not fade. They simply change shape as we grow. Those early losses were the first shadows on her heart, but they were only the beginning. From the wounds of her early years grew a determination she never spoke aloud. It wasn't ambition in the classic sense, no hunger for fame, no dream of red carpets. It was something more instinctive, almost primal, the need to step outside herself, to breathe in a life untouched by the fractures of her past. Acting offered that, not as an escape anymore, but as a doorway. In her late teens, she left Cornwall for London with a suitcase that carried more memories than clothes. The city was loud, chaotic, unforgiving, everything her childhood wasn't, but it also offered the anonymity she craved. In drama school, surrounded by voices louder and brighter than hers, she discovered the strange power of restraint. While others performed to be seen, Kristin performed to feel, and directors noticed. There was something magnetic in her quiet intensity, in the way she could express a storm without raising her voice. It was as though the tragedies she never spoke of had taught her a language only the camera could fully understand. Her first years were marked by small roles, fragile characters, wounded women, souls navigating the shadows. But each performance carried a truth too precise to ignore. Soon the industry began to circle around her name, like moths drawn to a flame that refused to flicker. Then came the role that changed everything. Prince of Tide, followed by the English Patient, where her icy elegance and controlled vulnerability became unforgettable. Awards followed, nomination after nomination, stage after stage. Suddenly, the girl who once lived in silence found herself standing under the brightest lights in the world, cameras clicking like tiny bursts of fate, sealing her into history. And yet, inside that rising dazzle, sensation of hollowness grew. Applause, she learned, was a sound that vanished too quickly. Fame gave her recognition, but not closeness. Success brought people to her, but it didn't make them stay. She became admired, but not understood. And she felt it. Every time she walked backstage after a standing ovation, every time she returned to a quiet hotel room in a foreign city, every time an interviewer asked about her elegance, but never her pain. Still, she climbed. Not out of pride, but because moving forward felt safer than looking back. She mastered the art of inhabiting other lives so perfectly that people forgot she had one of her own. On set, she could be fragile without consequence, passionate without fear, broken without shame. In fiction, she found the permission life had denied her. But success has a way of drawing not only admirers, but also those who see vulnerability as opportunity. In the glow of her ascension, the first real fractures began to show. Moments she ignored at the time, gestures she brushed aside, words that unsettled her. Shadows that would later grow into betrayals. She didn't know it then, but the people who would hurt her most had already started to walk into her life, quietly, casually, as if they belonged there. Success had carried her upward like a tide, but tides always retreat. And when they do, they reveal what was buried beneath. For Kristin, the first fractures appeared quietly, almost politely, like cracks hidden under layers of varnish. But once she noticed them, she couldn't unsee them. It began with trust. The kind she offered sparingly, carefully, shaped by a childhood that had taught her how easily people could disappear. In the industry, everyone spoke in promises, roles, loyalty, friendship. Yet behind the velvet curtains, behind the handshakes and the compliments, she began to sense a hollowness, smiles that tightened too quickly, alliances that shifted with convenience, admiration that felt conditional. She had stepped onto a stage far larger than any theater, and the stakes were no longer artistic. They were personal. There was a moment, small, almost unremarkable, when she realized the world she worked in was not built to protect softness. A producer she trusted dismissed her concerns with a laughter too sharp. A colleague she considered a friend used her name in a negotiation she never agreed to. A story about her private life appeared in the press, twisted just enough to sting. None of these were catastrophes, but together they created a slow, exhausting erosion. And then came the betrayal that left the deepest mark. Someone she had let close, too close perhaps, chose ambition over honesty. A project they had built together quietly shifted behind her back. Meetings were held without her, decisions made in rooms she wasn't invited into. She discovered the truth not through confession, but through indifference. There was no confrontation, no apology, just a silent, unmistakable realization. She had been replaced long before she understood she was disposable. It was on that evening, in a dimly lit dressing room, that she felt the old childhood fear return, the fear of sudden absence, of promises vanishing without warning. She stared at her reflection, at eyes that had learned to hide too much, and she whispered to herself, not in anger, but in acceptance, "This is why I do not forgive easily." Fame had lifted her into the light, but it was betrayal that taught her how cold that light could be. And from those wounds, 5 faces began to form. 5 stories she carried into the years that followed. 5 names, 5 wounds that never close. When Kristin finally allowed herself to look back, the faces emerged one by one, soft at first, like silhouettes in fog, then painfully distinct. Not all were villains, not all meant to hurt her, but intention rarely matters when the heart remembers only the scar. The gentle wound. The first was a man she loved when she was far too young. A love as quiet and hesitant as she was. He wasn't cruel, nor careless, just uncertain. And uncertainty, she learned, can cut as deeply as betrayal. He admired her ambition, yet feared it. He adored her stillness, yet didn't understand the shadow behind it. When her career began to rise, he shrank back, overwhelmed by a future he couldn't follow her into. He left one morning without drama, without farewell, only a brief apologetic note left on her kitchen table. It said he needed space to find himself. Kristin never hated him for leaving. She hated the silence he left behind. He was the first to teach her that love can vanish as quietly as breath on glass, and that goodbyes are sometimes delivered by absence rather than words. His wound was the gentlest, but it set the tone for everything that followed. The sudden blow. The second was a colleague, someone she trusted on set, someone who praised her publicly and undermined her privately. It happened during a project that meant the world to her, a role she had fought for, shaped, nurtured. She believed they shared an artistic bond, a mutual respect. But ambitions collide in sharp ways. Without warning, he presented himself to the producers as the true creative force behind the work. He diminished her contributions, questioned her dedication, and subtly painted her as difficult when she pushed back. His words spread quietly like smoke slipping under doors, reaching people she never anticipated. For the first time, she realized reputation could be stolen, not by truth, but by confidence. And betrayal could come from someone who smiled at her minutes earlier. His wound was sudden, a clean but brutal cut, unexpected and unforgettable. The deepest fracture, the third, was family, someone bound to her not by choice but by blood, a person she trusted far more than she trusted the world outside. This betrayal wasn't loud, it was intimate. A private matter concerning her mother's estate, a conversation that should have been held with care, turned into a tangle of mistrust and accusation. Documents were signed without her knowledge, decisions made without her voice. And the worst part wasn't the financial consequence, but the implication that her silence, her lifelong quietness, made her easy to bypass. She confronted them with trembling words, but even then, the response was dismissive, almost patronizing. "You're too sensitive," they said, as if sensitivity was a flaw rather than the battle armor she had built since childhood. That wound cut deeper than the others, carving itself into her sense of belonging. For if family could look past her, who wouldn't? The public harm. The fourth was not a single person, but a system, a collective of voices that fed on her image more than her truth. The press, the public, the spotlight that never asked permission. A rumor, small, careless, was printed about her private life. Something that twisted a moment of vulnerability into spectacle. And because it was easier to sell fiction than empathy, the story grew legs, spread, morphed. Reporters waited outside her home. Interviewers slipped the insinuation into questions disguised as concern. She felt exposed, misrepresented, used. And the world kept turning, unaware of the damage left behind. She didn't resent every journalist, only the ones who never cared if their story scraped pieces off her sanity, only the ones who forgot she was human. This wound was public, wide and humiliating, a wound delivered not by one voice, but by many. The unforgiven self, and then came the fifth. The one she had avoided naming for decades, the one she feared the most, herself. Not the actress adored on screen, but the woman who lived behind it. The woman who stayed silent when she should have spoken, who trusted too slowly and forgave too quickly, who carried grief from childhood into every relationship without realizing it. She blamed herself for choosing certain people, for ignoring certain signs, for repeating patterns she promised she would break. She blamed herself for the walls she built that kept danger out, but also kept tenderness from reaching her. The harshest betrayal wasn't from others, It was from the part of her that never believed she deserved anything different. Naming this truth hurt more than all the others combined, because self-betrayal cannot be explained away, cannot be undone, cannot be forgotten. It must be faced, lived with, understood slowly, like a long echo fading in the mind. Kristin exhaled. 5 names, 5 shadows. And yet in saying them aloud, even silently, something inside her loosened, softened, shifted. But forgiveness, that was an entirely different story. Night had fully settled outside her window, drawing long silhouettes across the room. Kristin remained seated where her confession had begun, her posture still, her breathing slow, like someone who had finally placed heavy stones down after carrying them for years. The city lights flickered faintly in the distance, but inside the world felt suspended, softened by the quiet honesty she had allowed herself. She thought of the 5 names again, not with anger this time, but with a strange tenderness. Wounds change when spoken aloud. They become less like knives and more like reminders. She knew she would never forget them, never fully forgive them, perhaps never completely understand them. But she also knew that naming these shadows, letting them exist outside her chest, had carved out a small space of peace inside her. Her gaze drifted to an old photograph on the shelf, her younger self, full of hope she never quite believed she deserved. She smiled, a thin, fragile smile, touched with regret, but also with acceptance. Life had given her brilliance and brokenness in equal measure, and she had carried both with grace, even when she didn't realize it. A gentle silence settled around her, warm and final, like the closing note of a long, aching song. She whispered to the room, to herself, perhaps to the past. Some scars stay, but they stop bleeding. Then came the questions that lingered long after the light faded. Can anyone truly move forward without forgiving what hurt them most? Or must some sorrows remain unhealed so we remember what it meant to feel deeply?